The other concern is the safety of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. Let me address both of these. First of all, why is this a nuclear flashpoint, Pakistan, India? Why are we nuclear at all? Pakistan followed a strategy of defensive deterrence right since its inception in 1947, because we were facing an existential threat. So we saw the threat, we quantified the deterrence that we need and maintained a conventional deterrence force. But in 1974, when India went nuclear, and then they tested a nuclear bomb in 1998, Pakistan had to go nuclear. And it went nuclear. And therefore now, both states are nuclear. All that we need to do and we must do, avoid conflict, resolve disputes, resolve the Kashmir dispute, and avoid unnecessary conflict situations. The other element is the safety of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. Let me say, in this August gathering, Pakistan established very strong custodial controls in the year 2000. Because I thought, now that we are declared nuclear state, we need to have custodial controls over the development of the nuclear assets, on our science organizations, and therefore we created a National Command Authority and a secretariat called Strategic Planning Division, which took over finances and security from the science organizations. And then, as far as the holding of those assets are concerned, we created an Army Strategic Force Command, which is a corps of about 16,000 troops, serving soldiers under a lieutenant general, which has 2 divisions under it, each one having 3 brigades, each one of the brigades having 3 regiments. So that is how we hold these assets. Can these fall into the hands of extremists? There is only 2 ways they can fall into the hands of extremists. Number one, that if the extremists are strong enough to fight this army of ours and defeat them and take over the assets. Not possible. Secondly, if the religious lobby is strong enough politically and they win in election, then form the government. And if they form the government, all the assets are theirs. Not possible again. In the last elections, their votes, they have only got about 3% seats. I don't see in any foreseeable future that they will ever win the elections to form a government. So therefore, I think we ought to know Pakistan, the nuclear assets are in safe hands. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to come to the economic and developmental inequities in the world. I would like to highlight a twofold problem. Economic or developmental inequities within countries, within states, and between states. And if these are not addressed seriously, I used a term in the United Nations that the islands of prosperity will be drowned in the oceans of poverty. The world must be aware of this. It's a serious situation, and if we project our minds within this 21st century, some decades beyond, we will face serious problems. In many of the third world countries, ladies and gentlemen, masses suffer from abject poverty and illiteracy. They live in subhuman conditions. They don't have 1 square meal a day. They have no access to water or energy. At the same time, they see the luxurious living within their own countries with the rich, and through the information technology and television communication revolution, they see the luxuries of developed countries. This gross inequality, I would say, breeds societal ills and crime. In agrarian societies, like most of the developing countries, including Pakistan, there is mass urbanization which goes on. People moving from villages to the cities, leading to ghettos and more crime. And then we see mass migration from the developing countries to the developed countries, legal or illegal, in search of food and employment. And if you don't narrow this gap, more will be happening in the future. The unchecked population explosion, especially within the poor, further exacerbates the situation. And in the West, when we talk of zero population growth, that is also counterproductive, because then we have an aging population and shrinking of youth. This has to be addressed on a war footing. The non-availability of energy, as I said, leads to cutting of trees in poor countries and deforestation in a big way, and environmental hazards. So this was a bird's eye view of economic inequities. So therefore, the developing countries must act themselves first of all and govern well. And I have a definition of any government or any leader who leads or governs a country applicable to all developing countries. Ensure the security, progress and development of the state, welfare and well-being of its people. This is the definition that must be followed by the countries themselves, within themselves, to close the gap, developmental gap, between haves and have-nots. But then, having said that, there is a responsibility of the developed world and the United Nations, may I say. They have to go help in the poverty alleviation, literacy level improvement, education, water and food availability. Therefore, the United Nations Millennium Development Goals have to be completed, have to be achieved, and the ODA that is to be contributed by the developed world of 0.7% of their GDP must be done. May I say the biggest burden on the developing countries is the burden of debt and debt servicing. While you see the economic crisis that we are going through and billions or if not trillions of dollars being given to companies which have failed, why can't debts of the third world be written off? And also may I say that the corruption done by many unscrupulous leaders in the developing countries, billions of dollars of the poor countries lying in Western banks. Why cannot there be an institutionalized arrangement that this money cannot be put in banks?